Hey guys, it's Cam here. Welcome back to a very special build room. And today we are turning 50. And before you ask, it's not me that's turning 50, but we've hit that magical 50 episode milestone. So therefore, this episode is going to be a big one. It would not be the build room if we weren't cutting some rust out of Violet Crumbles, our 1976 Toyota Celica. But in addition to that, we've got a couple of announcements and we've also got a giveaway. So stick around and check it out. Alright, so in the last week's episode, we had a good look at all of the rest of the damage, or at least what I hope is the rest of the damage on the rear end of Violet Crumbles. That was the chassis rails. We got the new boot lid fitted, and that seemed to show we had good alignment and good positioning on the rear end. I reckon that rear end is maybe about a centimetre shifted one way or the other. But generally speaking, it's okay. So then we put off the remainder of the windscreen trim and pulled the windscreen out, and that led to seeing that parcel shelf, which is not in good shape. So that's what we're gonna be doing today. And as I said, the idea is we're gonna get this thing onto a rotisserie and get it fully built, but it needs to have enough structural integrity so that it doesn't turn into a banana when I lift it on the ground from either end. Right now it's jacked up from the center right under the rails, so that's basically the strongest place you can do it. With a rotisserie, we've got one on either end, and what's gonna hold it up is those bad sections of the rails up front and the front chassis rails where the crossmember sits on. So yeah, I do wanna get some strength in, so that means I'm gonna repair the rust around that parcel shelf, because obviously we've got rails at the bottom and then we've got metal connecting at the top of the car, and that makes it nice and strong. You take this one away and you're reliant on the rails, and my rails are obviously compromised. So now I am gonna have to do some repairs to those rails, and I haven't figured out how we're gonna do that yet. It could be while it's on a rotisserie, or I might have to, I don't know, bolt it into position on a fixed point around the garage and then try some pulling techniques. I don't know yet. We'll have to get into it as we go. For now, let's have a look at that rear parcel shelf and put a plan together on how we're gonna fix this thing. All right, so we've got the boot hinges off, all the tension rods are out, the fuel lines are out and all that sort of thing. And then what I've done is gone through here and put a liberal coat of rust converter all through that, all down through these holes and all that sort of thing to neutralize as much of that rust as possible. This is gonna have to be one of those things where we just decide how far we're gonna take this. I mean, there will be some rust in here. I'm gonna try and get down there with some wire brushes and things like that, but I'm not gonna start cutting sections out of these panels to get in there and stuff like that. We will just rust convert and brush this as much as possible, and then we'll throw a layer of paint over the top of it, which should stop it rusting. And it is, you know, it's not exposed to the weather. It's only got wet here because of the leaky windscreen. So once we fix this problem, we should stop that rusting further anyway. And then if we have a look at this back shelf, actually that doesn't really show up well on camera, I think, because we've got backlight over here. Let me just close the door. I'll throw a light up and we'll have a look at this in detail. All right, so doors are down. Got some lights behind this and you can really see. So through here, you can see a number of sort of clean metal dots through there. They are the spot welds that used to weld that L-shaped piece onto this. And if you look along here, you can see that there's a clean area of metal and then there's this black stuff. And the black stuff is area that's pitted, been rust converted, and the rust is starting to come off. The browny red bits you can see, that's not rust, that's actually just areas where I haven't got all of the primer off. As you guys know, the primer on these is red. So we've neutralized all the rust in this area, but this panel is still pretty Swiss cheese. And this is such a hard part to repair on a car that I just want to get it out of the way, because I never ever want to have to come back to fix this ever again. And to be honest, if I sell the car, I don't want to sell the car knowing that there's a grenade full of rust here waiting to go off on the next owner. But it's going to be important here to keep some strength. So we want to make sure that we don't lose the strength here, because we don't want this to move around while we're doing the actual repair. So I'm thinking what I'm going to do is, the reason this is still silver and this is black is because there are a bunch of spot welds here, and what's happened is the water's got into it and then it's actually gone in between the two pieces of metal. So picture a piece of metal on top of this, in between the two, and it's rusted out both sections. So it's rusted, probably rusted from the bottom up on the windscreen seal, and then down towards through this. So this metal is actually thinner than this sheet metal. So my intent is, rather than try and cut this off right on the edge and then rebuild the edge and have to weld the edge over and make sure that it's all nice and smooth, is I'm actually going to trim it a little bit in from the edge. So we'll probably leave sort of 2 to 3 mil of metal over this bend, and then I'm going to replace sort of from here down to here. And we're going to do this in a couple of phases. Because this area is so long, it doesn't really make sense to me to try and fabricate a piece of metal that's going to fit this whole thing and weld it in. One, it's going to be an order of magnitude harder, but two, it's also going to make it really, really susceptible to warping. Whereas if I replace it in sections, I'm going to really limit the amount of warping that's possible. Also, there is a reinforcing panel under this in the middle. So I'm going to do it in 3 pieces. That's so that when I have seams, we'll have one seam here, and we'll have one seam on the other side, and they won't be blocked by this plate, which means if I need to get in there and from inside the boot, grind that weld and finish it up and neaten it up a little bit and then seal it properly, and certainly get some of that special rust-proof paint that we've got onto it, I can do that. Whereas if I have a seam right in here, I'll never get to the back of it ever again. So yeah, 3 different sections here that need to be repaired, and also we're gonna fix these while we're at it, right? And then we'll talk about what's gonna happen next. Alright, so this is where it all starts to go pear-shaped. This panel fit really, really well. I was really happy with it. The main issue was the radius on that top lip that I talked about before. So even though I got this panel in, I basically had to abandon that method for the next couple of holes, and what I'm reverting to here is cutting a single patch and patching the top, and then once I patch the top, I will create a second piece that goes inside and then gets welded at the top. The concern there is that when you're welding those 2 points at a peak together, when you're grinding it back, you start to make the metal really thin, and you've got to weld on quite a structural element there, which means it might move around when you are driving the car and putting it under load, which could lead to cracking through all the way through to the paint, which is no good for anyone. Also a particularly hard part of the car to repair on if that does happen down the track. So this is plan B, and I'm going to try and make it work as best as I can. so ran out of welding wire, that wasn't great, and could only get a tiny little spool from Bunnings. It is the Easter long weekend, so nothing is open, which kind of sucked, but at least we've got wire to keep going. So just checking in before we move on to the next bit. If we have a look, so on this side, I actually cut out a lot more than I thought I was gonna have to. So I've cut, sorry, I'm just staying on this side because from here, there's too much glare. But I have cut from here out to here. I was hoping to only cut a lot smaller portion out. And that's led to basically this area here can move up and down. It's only moving up and down by sort of a millimeter, but if I put my hand under here and push up, I can flex that fairly reasonably. You can see I'm getting at least about a millimeter movement there. So I've just got to be really careful that when I weld in a new piece of metal along here, I don't end up getting this back at the wrong height, all right? So, I mean, 1 millimeter is not gonna make really that much difference, but any more than that and I'd be in trouble. And the reason that is only flexing a millimeter at the moment is because this piece of metal here is still in good condition and has the edge on it. So, my original plan was to do this in thirds, as I said. So a piece over there, a piece crossing over this bridge piece, and then from sort of, probably would have been from here to here. Now, if I cut this all out at once, very little of the edge work intact, I think I am gonna have far too much movement. So I'm just changing up the plan a little bit. We are going to ensure that we only cut the minimal amount out here, and what I'm gonna do is replace from there, where I've cut it, to here. We are running out of time though. That Bunnings run chewed up quite a bit of time. So look, we may not get to fixing this bit today, and I'm not sure about this bottom bit, but let's just power through as much as we can and then see where we finish off. All right, so mixed results. I've thrown some copper primer over the whole thing. Part of that is just to show you guys, things show up a little bit better when you've coated them with paint. When it's bare metal, it's actually pretty hard to see some of the the variations and the dents and dings and stuff like that. So this is really a warts and all look. Pretty happy with some aspects of this. Now, first up, I've got to stop using those flap discs on a grinder to finish. So down here, see this all feels lumpy and stuff like that, and it is lumpy, but not by much. Similarly, looks like there's a big gouge here where those two panels joined. Now there is a little indent there, but it's not that big. And a lot of this is caused by me just grinding down a little bit too much with the flap discs. What I should be doing is grinding them close to the surface with the flap disc to get the bulk of the material off quickly, and then maybe switching over to a roll lock disc or something like that to finish it off. So, you know, here I left this proud and I'll come back and sand those down and things like that. But the bottom line is all of this is good enough to throw a skim coat of filler over, sand it back, and it'll be good, except for one bit. And basically I snatched defeat from the jaws of victory here, and that was around here. This went in well. It's only spot welded to here because I'm going to replace this metal. And I was careful to make sure that I got this height right here because it's quite important when the chrome goes on. And you would have seen me bringing the actual chrome stripping that goes all the way along the back and putting it up against this a couple of times. And that was to make sure that I got the curve here correct, so that when the chrome goes on, it's not going to look wonky. The issue that I ran into though is on this last section, and you may be able to, it shows up okay on camera, it's not the best, but maybe if I go inside the car and show you a flatter version, yeah, you can start to see that a little bit better. And that the issue is that we have a high area here, and then all of a sudden it drops down, and it's probably 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters too low all the way through this section here. I'm not quite sure what I'm gonna do here. I'm not happy with it. If I was just trying to be quick and dirty here, I could probably put some filler over this and you wouldn't notice because this piece of metal is where it should be. But I don't think I could live with myself for doing that. So I'll do one of two things. I'll either cut through here with the grinder, pop this up and then re-weld it. And if it needs to pop up more than a weld's worth, then I'll probably have to put a piece of sheet metal in there and maybe cut down into here a little bit and replace it. Or what I might do is remake this piece here and have it turn over and go down. I really like the piece over here that I repaired that turns over. It held its strength a lot better than any of these bits. They were moving all around, and especially when I was trying to weld them. So definitely prefer that way of doing this, but I need to figure out a way to get a sharper edge on it. But the good thing is that I actually have a plan to do just that. So let's jump back to the workbench. We'll talk about the plans for the next episode. We'll talk about the giveaway, and I'll talk about the other big announcement. All right, so before we wrap up with the episode, just bear with me for a second because there's a couple of announcements. The first announcement is we have a new store opening. We've done a complete overhaul of the old store. All of the old favorites of JDM Leno and the JDM Legends and all the other TBR merch are still there. But the site's much easier to navigate, and it also has much better support for Aussie dollar and US dollar conversions and things like that. So it should be much easier for you guys to get what you need to get. The second thing is, as part of the launch, we're also releasing a new line called the Classic JDM range. Now there's a bunch of different cars in that lineup. I'm actually wearing a prototype of the RA23 one at the moment. You can see that it's got obviously an RA23, surprise, surprise. The actual one in the store is gonna be aquamarine, like the Tetanus tip job, the RA23 that we wrecked, just so the colors pop a bit more. And we've got the TBR logo in a black, and on a black shirt, it's really nice and subtle, which is the sort of thing that you guys gave me in the feedback about the JDM Legends range, which have been updated as well. And then we've got just a build room in text at the bottom. And if you have a look on the back, it's also got the TBR logo again on the neckline. So yeah, there's 12 different cars. We've got all three of the first gen Celicas. We've got TA22, RA23 and RA28. If you are in the US, you can call them an RA21, 24 and 29 if you want, but there's no way I'm putting ugly smiley bumpers on a shirt, so we went with the Aussie models. But there's heaps of other cars as well. We've got Hacko Skylines, we've got early rotaries, we've got 2000 GTs, there's a whole bunch of other stuff. I'll put a link in the description below, but the bottom line is shop.thebuildroom.com and it will take you there. And as part of the launch of the JDM Classic line, we're gonna do the giveaway, which is over the next 5 episodes, we're gonna be giving 10 shirts away. So 2 comments per episode I'm gonna pick, maybe at random. Maybe I'll pick the ones I like the most that are funny or give some good information to other people. But whatever I choose, it'll be 2 per episode, a total of 10 over the course of the next 5 episodes. And all you have to do to make sure that you're in the draw is to comment below. So yeah, I won't say too much more about that because I don't like continually plugging merch on the channel. So let's move on and have a quick conversation about that repair and then talk about what's up for the next episode. So if I'm honest, in general, that repair was bittersweet. We did replace a lot of metal and there's a lot of good sheet metal back in there, but the 2 major things are I've got to stop doing my finish grinding with those flap discs because they kind of flex a little bit. So whenever you're trying to grind down the top of a weld, it wants to flex on either side of it if you push too hard, and it'll take out the metal on either side. Now I've been welding in quite thick, I think it's 1mm steel into that because it's such a rigid area on the car. So there's still plenty of sheet metal left, it just doesn't look good. Now I'm not gonna try and finish grind that down flat because all I'm gonna do is take more material off, and the bottom line is it's gonna need a skim of bog anyway to finish it up. So that portion I can get over. What I can't get over is that low spot on the last bit of that repair I did. And actually I've gone through the footage and have realized what I've done. When I was welding in that plate, what I did was the 2 sides I clearanced a little bit too much. So I actually had about a 2, maybe 2.5mm gap there. And then when I was welding it up, what I did is I leant on the panel as I was welding, and obviously putting my weight on that panel pushed it down. I welded it in place in that low position and now it's messed up. So I am gonna have to repair that. It's definitely coming out. It's just a case of what I do to repair it. The bench vise bending press, or whatever you want to call it, just was not giving me the angle on the edge that I needed. Now, I may still be able to save the one that I did, as I said, weld a line on top of it, grind it back into a sharp point. But what I actually need, and what I'm gonna need for a few other repairs, so this isn't a complete waste, is a decent bending brake. So that's what we're gonna do in the next episode. We're gonna build a bending brake from scratch. The reason is I need quite a large bending brake to do the 45 or near on 45-degree piece that goes all around the back of the windscreen and holds the seal in place. That I want to do in one continuous unit, ideally, just using the shrinker stretchers and a nice big piece of angle steel. But it needs to be 1200mm long. And if you've ever looked at the pricing on bending brakes that can bend 1200mm steel, they're pretty spendy. And I really don't want to spend that kind of money, especially because most of them also come with big stands and things like that. And I just don't have room for it. This garage is chock-a-block at the moment. We're gonna have to do something about that in the future too. So yeah, we'll build our own like a Jedi's rite of passage. And then we can use it to bend up that big piece I need, and we'll also try a smaller piece and we'll replace some of those bits. I really do like the idea of having the metal fold rather than 2 pieces of metal that are joined, because when you weld on that, you've got to be able to get to the back of it. And luckily, once I get this on the rotisserie, I've actually figured out that I can flip the whole car upside down and then I can weld it properly from inside the boot, which is lucky because I don't like the idea of having those 2 pieces welded together and then ground back to a beveled edge without getting to the back. I think over time what will happen is the metal will move and it'll end up cracking or separating. And in fact, while I was doing one of the back corners, it did actually crack up the side pillar. I was hitting it with a hammer at the time, but it goes to show that that metal was not strong enough and I had to go back, grind it down a lot further, build the weld up so there was a big glob of it because I can't get to the back of that area. So you do have to be careful. So yeah, that'll be the next episode, and then in the one after that, we will finish out that back section and it should all be looking bang on. Oh, and before I forget, if you're going to the JDM car show tomorrow at the Camfield, keep an eye out for me. I'll probably be wearing a JDM Leno shirt. Come up and say hi. And with that said, there's just the usual stuff of, if you're new to the channel, I'll put the full Violet Crumbles series up here and I'll put some other episodes down here. Other than that, I just want to say thanks for watching. See you next time on The Build Room. Bye for now.